The night has always had a peculiar way of turning simple details into something uncomfortable, and when someone gets into a rideshare car after midnight, the mind tends to play tricks that nobody likes to admit. But there is a clear difference between imagination and what actually happens before our eyes, without explanation, without logic, without any chance of being confused with something ordinary. Maybe you've already felt a silent presence during a ride, as if someone was sitting right behind you, breathing slowly, watching your every move through the rearview mirror. Maybe you've noticed a strange reflection, a shadow where nothing should exist. Today, you're going to walk through 5 accounts that drivers and passengers avoid telling, because touching this kind of experience is like reliving a moment the brain tries to forget. And the deeper you go, the more you'll realize that some trips simply don't belong to our world. These stories begin in simple ways, like any nighttime ride, but they carry a detail that turns everything upside down. Nothing that happened in them can be explained by apps, updates, GPS errors, or human mistakes. Many accounts came from experienced professionals, people who spend hours driving and who know how to recognize strange behavior, yet admit they've never faced anything as disturbing as what they witnessed. And as you listen to each case, you'll notice a pattern that repeats itself subtly, almost imperceptibly, but present enough to leave the feeling that something follows these trips, something that might be closer than you imagine, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The first story begins with a driver working on an apparently normal late-night shift. Ride requests were low, the city was quiet, and the darkness of the streets felt heavier than usual. He received a call from a nearly deserted street, but when he arrived, he found no one. Still, the app registered the passenger boarding, as if an invisible person had opened the door and settled into the back seat. At that exact moment, the inside of the car grew colder, fogging the windows even without any rain outside. The driver heard a faint sound, like fabric dragging, and instinctively checked the rearview mirror. There was nothing but emptiness, but the weight on the seat revealed that something was there, something breathing far too slowly. As the ride continued, the app showed the passenger moving digitally, indicating they were shifting positions in the seat like any normal person would. The driver tried to convince himself it was a system glitch, but every subtle noise from the back made his breathing shorter. When they finally arrived at the destination, the app ended the ride by itself. The weight on the seat disappeared, and the cold air vanished as if it had never existed. He opened the history to check who the passenger was, but the ride wasn't there. Not the beginning, not the route, not the end. Nothing, just the silence of the night and the certainty that the trip had carried something that didn't belong in that car. The second account comes from an experienced driver, someone who had already dealt with aggressive passengers, drunk passengers, anxious passengers, and those who were far too quiet. But none of them compared to what he encountered that night. He received a call in a remote neighborhood, and when he parked, he saw a figure standing on the sidewalk, motionless, staring at the ground as if they had been waiting for something for a very long time. The passenger got in without saying a word, and the silence was so heavy it seemed to fill the whole car. The dim lighting revealed a face far too pale, almost colorless, and clothes that seemed completely out of time. The driver tried to start a conversation, but got no response, just a slight tilt of the head, as if the person was stuck between being there and not being there at all. During the trip, something began to bother the driver. Every time they passed through a brighter area, the passenger seemed to grow even paler, almost transparent, as if the light exposed the fact that he didn't belong in that space. Near the halfway point, the driver made a turn and reflexively glanced back to give a warning. That's when his blood froze. The seat was completely empty. The passenger had vanished without opening the door, without making a sound, simply disappeared. At that moment, the app displayed a notification saying the ride had been cancelled, even though they had nearly completed the route. Days later, after mentioning it to a local resident, he learned that the description matched a man who had died years before right at the spot where he had been picked up. The third story involves something even more disturbing: technology guiding people to places that shouldn't exist. A passenger requested a ride home after working late. Everything seemed normal until the GPS began recalculating repeatedly, redirecting them through unfamiliar streets. The driver tried to correct the route manually, but the app ignored his input. They passed through a street neither recognized, lined with dark houses, dead trees, and an atmosphere so dense it seemed to press against the inside of the car. Motionless silhouettes stood on the sidewalks, watching the vehicle pass the still to be ordinary people. Every time the passenger checked the rearview mirror, he noticed the shadow behind him didn't match his own. The driver grew nervous, and the more he tried to return to the main road, the more the GPS insisted on leading them to routes that didn't exist on any real map. At one point, the radio turned on by itself, static filling the car, followed by notifications appearing on the passenger's phone with no sender. When they finally reached a familiar avenue again, the app showed they had never left it. No detours recorded, no alternative routes, just the normal path, as if that dark, twisted route had been created exclusively for that ride and erased the moment they escaped it. The fourth case is considered the most disturbing, not just because of its intensity, but because several drivers reported similar encounters involving the same figure. A driver received a ride request to an isolated, almost rural area. The only light came from a flickering street lamp illuminating an old house that seemed haunted by its own existence. Someone emerged from the shadows and got into the car, moving as if every step weighed heavily. Throughout the ride, the passenger spoke in disconnected sentences, mentioning events unrelated to the present as if describing memories from another time, predictions of things yet to happen. The driver began to notice the passenger reacting to things he couldn't see, staring out the window as if following invisible figures walking beside the car. At one point, the passenger calmly said, "It will happen to you too. When the time comes." The driver froze, turned around and found nothing. The passenger had vanished completely, leaving behind an old, time-worn object that shouldn't have been there. When he shared the experience in local driver groups, he discovered others had encountered the same figure, always leaving clues, always disappearing without explanation. And then we reach the fifth account, perhaps the most unsettling of all, because it challenges the basic idea of reality, a ride that never existed. A driver was finishing his shift when he received a final request. The passenger's photo looked like a digitized image from decades ago, and the address led to an abandoned house. When he arrived, the front door was slightly open, as if someone had just passed through. An elderly man entered the car without saying a word, carrying a strong smell of wet earth, as if he had just walked in from the rain even though the night was dry. He asked to be taken to a cemetery. During the ride, the silence was so dense it seemed to absorb the sound of the engine. The man spoke short, disconnected phrases, like "I don't like walking alone at night," always staring out the window with a vacant expression. When they finally arrived, the driver turned to tell him they had reached the destination, but the seat was empty. The door hadn't moved, the air hadn't changed, nothing indicated anyone had left the car. At that moment, the app ended the ride on its own, the dashboard clock reset, and the history erased any trace of the trip. Days later, a passenger recognized the description of the old man and said he had died many years earlier right in that abandoned house. As these accounts connect, it becomes impossible to ignore the feeling that something roams between routes, occupying back seats, manipulating directions, appearing and disappearing without leaving a trace. Some cases seem to involve presences trapped between worlds. Others hint at interference in technology, as if something used digital cracks to manifest itself. And the most unsettling part is that both drivers and passengers describe the same sensations: sudden cold, changes in the environment, lapses in memory, simultaneous device failures. Each story reinforces the idea that the night hides more than humans can imagine. After hearing these accounts, you might start paying more attention the next time you call a rideshare late at night. You might notice a sound you didn't notice before, a misplaced shadow, a brief sensation that something entered the car without you seeing it. And even if you try to convince yourself it's just your imagination, the doubt will remain. Because the truth is simple, not every ride is just a trip between 2 points. Some cross boundaries that should never be crossed. And when that happens, neither the driver nor the passenger comes out the same.